Greetings everyone, in this video I'll be showing you my colour recipe for the Space Marine Raptors. Renowned for their stealth and ferocity, these warriors embody the grim darkness of the 41st millennium. I'll guide you through some incredible battle damage and weathering techniques to truly bring these characters to life. Let's dive in and transform these miniatures into striking representations of the Raptors' indomitable spirit. So the first thing that I want to talk about is something that I love to do to pretty much all of my miniatures, especially when it comes to things like Space Marines where they've got like really dinged up and battle worn armour. And this is before we even start to prime our miniature up. And all I've got here is just a scalpel, and I'm just working my way around the miniature, just really delicately just putting little dinks and scratches. These don't have to be massive, you know, it's all about like the delicacy and placing it where it needs to be. So for areas like down near the bottom, you know, it's all got to like fit to scale and stuff. So really take your time with this. Don't just rush into it and start like attacking it with a scalpel, but just really finely. And what I'm doing is I'm taking little chunks out, I'm adding little tiny scratches, and with each surface that I go around, I'm just like very lightly pressing on it. Now the reason I'm doing this is because it's going to add some pre-battle damage, like, you know, the Space Marines are naturally going to get dinged up, all their armor's not going to be smooth, and it also, later on when we come to like wash phases and stuff, it's going to go in to those areas, and it's also going to stand out a little bit more and give the eye something to look at as we go around the miniature. But it's best to pay special attention to areas that are naturally going to get more damage. So for areas like on shoulder pads or big areas, you might want to put a couple of bullet holes in there if you want to do that, especially around like the knees and like areas like on the back with the backpacks if they've been laid down or anything. Really think about your character and what this character might have gone through. But obviously when you start to come up, there's going to be areas like on his chest and stuff that are not going to be as deep or as like gnarly as some of the lower areas. But you'll see just as I'm working around, you know, I'm not pressing on too hard. Some places I want to do them a bit lighter, and some places I want to press on that little bit more. This is just something that you can experiment with, but I really like the look of it, and it's going to start to add to that grim darkness and some pre-weathering and battle damage before we've even primed up the miniature. As a side note, you can also add other products to create a more realistic weathered look, such as like little bits of like grime, which could be typhus corrosion, or another product I really like to add to my miniatures to give it like the paint's peeling or just got like some burns or just general corrosion is crackle paint. And again, these can be great fundamentals that you can apply beforehand, which is going to help us when we get into our painting process. So now we're going to prime up this miniature in Mechanicus Standard Grey, or what I've done is Colour Forger's Standard Grey. It's just a colour match, but again you can prime these up in whatever colour you desire. Now I briefly want to talk about the colours, and the colours are what I'm going to be using, which is the main bulk of the armour. It'll appear on screen now, and these are the colours that we're going to be going up to be able to achieve the colour of the Raptors, this like muted dark off green. Now ways of application I want to quickly address before the airbrush police decide to jump into the comments and give me hell, because yes, I do use an airbrush for this. However, there's nothing stopping you using standard brushes, and if you really want to see, you know, some amazing stipple techniques that you can do along this, then go and check out my Ultramarines video where I painted up an Ultramarine using this battle worn stipple technique, which in reality can look a little bit better if you want a little bit more of a battle worn look. Then please go and check that out if you don't have an airbrush, and then you just apply the colours that you're going to be using in this video for the Raptor itself. So first up is the Death Corps drab, and I'm just applying a couple of thin layers of this all around the miniature, and that's the reason why I primed it in the grey first, which is going to help us achieve that opacity first of all a lot quicker, because when you put it on like a black background or a black undercoat or a black prime, then it's not going to show up as like, oh, like the opacity and the saturation is not going to be quite where it needs to be. So that's why we went for the grey. And then from a zenithal top-down motion, all I've done is get the Death World Forest, and from a 45 degree like a zenithal, is just highlighted the miniature, and it's going to hit all those highlights areas for the midtones. And then I mixed a little bit of 50-50 of the Ogyrn camo, and that's going to be our final highlight. Well, just take your time, work your way around the miniature, and again, don't forget you can apply this via brush or airbrush. Next up, we want to get all our parts blacked out, so any areas that you want to be black on the miniature, it's a good time to go in and paint all them. Now the only other colours that I've used on this is the metallics, which was Valejjo Model Air Gunmetal. Yes, it is an air paint, but you do get great coverage via brush, which is I've done it via brush. And then all the brown parts like his belt and his little leather pouches, these were base coated out in AK Grim Brown. Now you could easily do these in Rhinox hide, but for me I wanted a bit more of a muted, to go along with like the stealthy theme, and it's not as in your face, and it's the Grim Brown's just a little bit nicer in my eyes. Then it's time to add some transfers, and for my transfers I just use the microsol and microset, and I've just moved them into position and gone on there, let them dry for a little bit with the microset, and then I've used microsol with a cotton bud to push it down, and this is going to start to melt the vinyl and adhere it to like where you want your vinyls to be. Now once I've let them dry, and you can use a blow dryer if you want to aid this, what I do then is go back to my scalpel and very carefully, and you really need to be careful at this point, is just take out little chunks, but make sure they're dry because you'll end up moving the vinyl about all over again. And what I do, a little tip, is I apply the pressure first and then I use the dragging motion after to pull away the areas that I actually don't want. And I'm just going in there and I'm adding some little scratches and dinks as though that vinyl has worn over time, and this can apply to any of your vinyls that you're adding onto your miniatures. It's just a little thing that I love to do to make them more worn. Then we're going to go into some battle worn and some chips, and if you want to use the sponge technique you can use it, but for this I didn't want to go too crazy with it, but I've just got some Rhinox hide and I've just got in there and applied it here, there, like some chips onto some parts of where, again, going back to like what we did at the beginning, to areas that would be naturally more scuffed. And you can also use some of the bits that you've chipped out from earlier. If some of them are the deep ones, now's the time to go in there and paint them, and you can actually use it as like a guide where to put your chips. But just with a brush I've just worked my way around and applying them here, there and everywhere. Naturally, as I've got towards the top, they're not as prominent, but places like elbows and a couple of shoulder pads, that's where I'm going to dink them up. And I also go over and paint a couple into the transfers to make sure that it all blurs together. Now at this point, if you wish, you can add a varnish to seal everything in. If you want to do that, if you want it to be on more of the matte side, you can. But for me, I didn't actually do that on this miniature. I just went straight into our wash phase. Now we're going to give the entire miniature a unifying wash of Villiany Inc.'s Goons Grime. And again, I've got this loaded up through my airbrush and I'm just applying it that way. But you can actually do this with a brush as well, and this will make sure that it does run into all the crevice areas. But through an airbrush, I'm just applying this in. It's all mixed in a 1:1 ratio, so it's 1 part Goons Grime, 1 part Mineral Spirits. And areas like the bottom of the legs, I'm just going to apply this a little bit heavier to make sure that there's more grime in those naturally accumulated areas. And now a lot of people have been asking me recently as well, why use the Villiany inks over like streak and grime and stuff, and there's nothing stopping you going out and using enamels such as like streak and grime and stuff. But for me, I'm always going to love the Villiany inks because of the unique properties that they've got. You can, and we'll get more into this a little bit later on for the surface variation section, but you've got control over these where if you want them to be on more of the matte side, you can do that, or if you want them to be a bit more on like the satin side, you've got the option to do that as well. But again, why not streak and grime? Why use the Goons Grime? Well, Goons Grime is a formulated mix that's specifically designed of the original streak and grime, which is a bit more of like on a brown side with a hint of green, whereas streak and grime these days tends to be more on the green side. Now also for me, the AK version tends to dry a little bit too chalky for my liking, whereas Goons Grime, you've got that control whether you want it to be chalky or you want it to be on more on a matte side or again the satin side. And the beauty of the Goons Grime as well is it leaves more of a mottled look with like actual bits of debris and stuff, rather than like that horrible chalky look which tends to dull down your paint job. But yeah, that's my reasoning for using the Villiany Inks range. Obviously, naturally, I'm quite good friends with those guys, but I'm always going to promote their products because and I'm always going to talk about products what I believe in. It's again, when I've done reviews on this channel, I always speak about the products that I do love. So yeah, that out of the way. Once you've done that, give it around 15-20 minutes to dry. You can use again a blow dry to help speed it up, and then we're just going to come into our removal phase, which is what we class as a reductive technique. And for this, I've just got a Q-tip with a bowl of clean mineral spirits, and with a Q-tip obviously you get two ends on it, so one end's dipped in lightly into the mineral spirits, and this is what I use just to start, like reactivating the actual mineral spirits itself. And then you'll notice as I go through it, I flip and I switch to the dry side, and this just buffs it up and helps me push it around and blend it into like areas where I needed it to be blended. But again, if you want to learn more about the Villiany inks range and the ways that you can use them, then I'll leave a link in the description below to their resources page. Go and check it out. I think you'll really dig it, and you'll learn some amazing techniques of what you can actually do with the goons grime itself. But yeah, go over, check out the Villiany inks, and a lot of people are scared of a lot of like using enamels, and honestly, I really think you should get these products and start using them. They're not a scary product to use or anything like that. They're not going to kill you. A lot of people think, oh my god, I'm using enamel, I'm going to die. It's not like that. Obviously, there's precautions that you do have to take, but it's just a case of looking at those precautions. But head over to the Villiany inks site, you'll see that these Villiany inks have got the least toxicity on the market at the moment. But you can learn more about those and the Villiany inks over at their resource page. Now, once all that has dried, we're just going to add some additional highlights and scratches, and also highlight underneath some of the chips to give them a 3D appearance, as though the paint underneath has started to chip off, which when the night naturally hits it, this is what you sort of get on Armour. And for that, we're just going to go back to our 50-50 mix of Death World Forest and the Ogyrn camo. And again, I'm just lightly working my way around, and I'm not edge highlighting in here. I'm just using like a tippy-tappy method, like what we did with the chips, and I'm just, where I've put chips, I'm just going along and adding some more little taps, as though that armour has been further scuffed, and it just adds some more battle damage, and also separates your panels like you would with an edge highlight, but it doesn't look like an edge highlight. But this can just really like give you your miniature that little bit more of a punch that's needed after the wash. Now, all the metallic areas, I gave them a little dry brush over of fang steel just to fetch them back up a little bit and add a little bit more contrast. And then for all his leather pouches and belt, I gave these a dry brush with the original Grim Brown, and I mixed it 50-50 with mourn fang brown, and then I put a little bit more mourn fang brown in it as a final highlight. Now, if you really want like a really nice leather tutorial, then I do have a leather tutorial on this channel. I really recommend going and watching that, and I really think you'll dig it if you want to add a little bit more spice to your leather. Now, this is the part of the video where I wanted to talk more about the Villiany inks range and the weathering, and the difference that you can get in surface variation depending on how much you thin them. The two colours that I'm going to be playing around with here are Sector Rust and Dystopian Brown, both by Villiany inks. And what I'm doing is I'm mixing it up a lot, and this is an area where you can get a little bit creative if you want areas to be a bit more rusty. Put a bit more of the Sector Rust in there, and if you just want some more like subtle like blends, where you can mix this with the Dystopian Brown. And there's no like format to this. I've just got like a bowl of mineral spirits and a bowl of each colour, and I'm just messing around with dilutions and ratios and just adding the streaks. And again, this doesn't have to act as rust. I think this colour like complements the green armour really nice. And again, it could just be a bit of like jungle weathering and like browny horrible stains that they've got. But the beauty of it is where you can start to mess around, because the more mineral spirits you add, obviously the more like chalky and like that dry look you're going to get. But the more like of the actual colour that you put into it, and maybe don't like use the reductive technique if you want to blend or move them about, because I do recommend doing that. Like this section here at the bottom, I want this to be more of like a transitional colour, And what I do sometimes is get my Q-tip and just feather and buff them out. So it's not really a streak, it's more of a colour transition, as though part of that armour has started to like go a different colour and get like some mottling. And what this will do is leave some areas satin and some areas more on the matte side. Now if you do find that, you know, you go a bit too far and you want to like matte them up a little bit, just add a bit of mineral spirits. Or again, if you want, you can always grind and spray a little bit of like ultra matte varnish into areas and then go back over it with this, just to get some nice difference and blends between surface variation, like, you know, like a fighter would naturally have. Like say if it's rained and there's still a bit of like mud on his leg that's stayed a little bit damp and a little bit wet. But this just really fetches your miniature to life. And again, I'm just working my way around the entire miniature, adding streaks and mixing the colours sometimes straight from the pot on their own and making like streaks heavier. And again, that's the beauty of the Villiany. You can build these up in layers, and like I like to do to get that little bit of like colour variation, come in with a Q-tip on some of the areas, wipe them off, add bits here and there. And again, it's getting creative with what you're comfortable with and just getting some thin brushes and adding streaks. Now naturally I am placing this a little bit more heavier in places that would get like grimy, and if, you know, like round bolts and stuff on his shoulder blade, I've made sure that they've got like a little bit of rust that's accumulated around them, as always had like repairs done. But again, this section is where you can really get creative and playful and testing out, you know, like the Villiany range and with the different ratios and mixers. And you can even use some other colours of enamels and stuff and oils if you want to do that, depending on what sort of theme yours are in. If they're in like a dusty theme, you might want some dust on their legs, or if they're in like a sandy one, you might want to go for some more like yellows and other colours along those lines. And you can even go back to your streak and grime or your goons grime and start to add streaks in with them. It's just an extra layer of weathering that really fetches this miniature to life. And that brings us to the end of this tutorial, the last final part that I've not shown in the video, and which you again can get creative, is the eye colour for this. I went for like a turquoisey blue, and it's very simple. I just painted the eye lenses white and then used a contrast paint Pterodon turquoise inside there to fetch them all back to life, and just added one additional dot of white. And again, with these you can use any colours you want. If you want to use oranges or reds or greens or any other blues, you can do that. So it's just put the white in and then any colour contrast paint that you want over the top of that, it'll get the job done. The basing for this miniature was just done using Kraut Cover's Snowy Highland Past. I wish I'd done a bit more of like a foresty theme where these guys are naturally more fighting. I wish I'd have done that. I didn't think at the time about the lore, but then again, this all comes down to planning and, you know, whatever theme that you want to go for. So I hope you've enjoyed this tutorial, and I hope it's been a little bit of a different look for you into the Villiany range and some different weathering techniques like the pre-weathering that we've done. And you'll see now as we go around the miniature, you know, all these little scratches and stuff what we've put in previously really create an extra like 3D dimensional layer to the miniature that you wouldn't naturally get, and it all just ties together to build this amazing weathered miniature. So I hope you've enjoyed this tutorial. If you have, you can help me out by liking the video. It only takes a second, and if you're not already, please consider hitting that subscribe button. And if you want to support me and this channel a little bit further, I've got this whole buy me a coffee link and everything like that. But just simply liking the video and commenting below is one of the best things you can do to help me and this channel out. So I hope you enjoyed it, and until next time guys, I will catch you in my next video.